The morning arrived without ceremony, the way it always did out here. Thin light slipping over the hills, frost clinging to fence wire like a last, stubborn memory of night. The ranch sat quiet, almost holding its breath. No radio, no dogs barking, just wind moving through dry grass and the low creak of wood that had learned how to age without complaint. The man stood near the corral with his hands in his jacket pockets, boots planted in soil that had fed his family once and now barely fed itself. His name was Elias Carter, though most people had stopped saying it aloud years ago. Out here, names weren't needed much. The land knew him. The barns knew his weight. The house, small, weathered, and too quiet, knew the sound of him moving from room to room alone. He had been awake long before sunrise, not because he wanted to be, but because sleep had grown light and unreliable with the years. It left him early like so many other things had. He poured coffee that tasted faintly of rust and stared out the window while steam rose and vanished, thinking of bills folded and refolded on the kitchen table, thinking of how many winters the roof might still hold, thinking of whether ordering a horse, just one, had been hope or foolishness. The ranch used to sound different. He remembered that. Hooves in the morning, voices, laughter once, a long time ago, when his wife still hummed while hanging laundry and his son ran barefoot through dust that didn't yet feel like an accusation. Those sounds are gone now, not abruptly, but the way water disappears from a well, slowly enough that you don't panic until it's already dry. The truck arrived just after the sun cleared the ridge. Elias heard it before he saw it. An unfamiliar engine cutting through the quiet, too loud, too impatient. He stepped outside, squinting against the light, one hand resting on the fence rail as if the ground itself might shift beneath him. A white livestock trailer rolled in, clean in a way that didn't belong here, pulled by a truck with no markings. No company name, no number, just metal in motion. The driver climbed down without greeting. Younger than Elias, but already tired in the eyes. Papers were exchanged with minimal words. The man avoided looking past him, avoided the ranch itself, as though staying too long might invite questions. When a signature was done, the driver nodded once, sharp and final, and went back to the cab. "You want to check him?" Elias asked, more out of habit than insistence. The driver shook his head. "Horse is yours now." The trailer door opened with a hollow clang that echoed longer than it should have. Dust shifted inside. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shape stepped forward. The horse descended slowly, carefully, as if the earth were uncertain. His coat was a muted brown dulled by travel, ribs faintly visible beneath skin pulled too tight. One side of his face was swollen, the eye half closed and rimmed with dark purple, like a storm cloud trapped beneath flesh. There was dried blood near the cheekbone, thin lines that caught the light and refused to disappear. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. Not shock, not anger yet, but recognition. He had seen that look before. In animals. In people. The look of something that had learned to expect impact. The driver was already pulling away. The dust settled slowly after the truck vanished down the road, leaving silence heavier than before. Elias stood there with the lead rope in his hand, its coarse fibers warm from the horse's breath. That was when he noticed the paper. It was tied clumsily near the knot, folded twice, edges softened from being handled too many times. He hesitated before opening it, as if reading it would change what was already standing in front of him. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, human in a way contracts never were. "I'm sorry," it read. "He wasn't supposed to be sent like this. Please don't send him back. Please." No name, no explanation, just the quiet weight of someone reaching out and then letting go. Elias folded the note again and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The horse shifted, flinching slightly when Elias moved too fast. He stopped immediately, lowering his hand, letting it hover in the air until the animal's breathing slowed. "It's all right," Elias said, voice low, unsure if he was convincing either of them. He led the horse toward the nearest stall. Each step was careful, measured, as though both were testing whether the ground would hold. Inside the barn, light filtered through cracks in the wood, laying pale stripes across old tools and empty spaces. The smell of hay lingered, though there was less of it now than there used to be. Elias closed the gate behind them and rested his forehead briefly against the wood. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't budgeted for injuries or secrets tied to ropes. He had ordered a horse to keep the ranch alive, not to inherit someone else's damage. The horse stood still, head lowered, one eye watching him. Not with fear exactly, but with a cautious patience that suggested he had learned how to endure first and ask questions later. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose tin on the roof. Elias straightened, reached up slowly, and began to loosen the halter. He did not yet know where the note came from. He did not know what kind of people had sent an animal away bruised and silent. He only knew that whatever had happened before this moment had left its mark, and that standing here, with the barn breathing around them and the morning still young, he had been given a choice he could not ignore. Some turning points announced themselves loudly. Others arrive quietly, tied with string, waiting for someone to notice. Elias moved with the deliberateness of a man who had learned that sudden gestures unsettled more than they helped. He closed the barn door halfway, leaving a slice of daylight to rest across the straw, and waited. The horse's ears flicked at the sound, then settled. Dust hung between them, catching the light, each mote turning slowly as if time itself had decided to ease up. He spoke again, softer this time, not to instruct but to exist. The words didn't matter. The tone did. The horse's breathing steadied, deep and uneven at first, then longer, more patient. Elias reached for the bucket, filled it from the tap that groaned like an old man clearing his throat, and carried the water back with both hands. He set it down and stepped away. No pressure, no hurry. The horse lowered his head and drank, stopping once to glance up through the swollen eye, gauging the space between them. Elias leaned against the stall rail and watched the rhythm of the animal's jaw, the way thirst announced itself honestly. When the bucket was empty, he refilled it. When it was empty again, he did it once more. Care, he had learned, was often repetitive, the kind that didn't ask for applause. Only then did he approach the halter. He paused with his hand raised, letting the horse decide. The animal shifted his weight, but didn't retreat. Elias's fingers found the leather, cracked and stiff with old sweat. He loosened it slowly, easing the strap free as if untying a knot that had been cinched too tight for too long. The halter came away. The horse lifted his head and blinked, surprised by the absence. Elias swallowed. The bruise was worse up close, deep, layered, the kind that came from more than a single blow. He fetched a clean cloth and warm water, testing the temperature against his wrist the way his wife used to when their boy scraped a knee. The memory rose, uninvited, and passed just as quickly, leaving behind the habit. He touched the cloth to the horse's cheek. The animal flinched, a sharp intake of breath, then froze. Elias withdrew his hand at once and waited. Minutes passed. The barn settled around them. A sparrow landed on a beam overhead and watched. Easy, Elias murmured, though he wasn't sure who the word was for. The second attempt was gentler, slower, the cloth barely grazing the skin. This time the horse didn't pull away. Elias cleaned what he could, careful not to linger. Beneath the grime, scars emerged, thin, pale lines that ran across the neck and shoulder, old injuries that spoke of routine harm rather than accident. Elias felt a heat behind his eyes and looked away until it passed. He fetched salve, the last of it, unscrewing the lid with a hesitation that acknowledged the cost. He applied it sparingly, then more where it was needed. The horse's eyelids drooped. A sigh escaped him, low and involuntary, the sound of a body allowing itself a fraction of relief. When the work was done, Elias stepped back and sat on the overturned crate near the stall. He stayed there as the light shifted and the morning warmed, as the horse explored the space, sniffing corners, testing the bedding. When hunger made itself known, Elias brought hay. The horse ate slowly, as if unsure the supply would last. By midday, the ranch had resumed its quiet. Elias's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He ignored it. He had learned which calls demanded attention and which could wait. He brewed another pot of coffee and carried a mug back to the barn, the steam rising in thin lines. He He drank and watched and listened. In the early afternoon, he unfolded the note again. The words hadn't changed. Their weight had. He read them until the paper softened further, then smoothed it and returned it to his pocket. Whoever had written it had done so with risk. Elias recognized that, too. He called the veterinarian just before dusk. The estimate came measured and apologetic. Elias thanked her and hung up, staring at the ledger on the kitchen table as if it might argue on his behalf. He did the math twice, then once more. Something else would have to wait. Something always did. Night fell early. Elias carried a lantern into the barn and set it on a hook. The flame wavered, then steadied. He checked the wound again, adjusted the bedding, and filled the water one last time. The horse stood close now, not pressing, just near enough to share the light. When Elias shifted, the horse shifted too, matching him without thinking. He felt the words rise before he planned them. "You're not alone now," he said, the sentence settling into the space between them like a promise that would need work to keep. The horse lifted his head. For a moment, the swollen eye caught the lantern glow and reflected it back, a small, clear point of light. Elias stayed until the flame burned low, until the night outside pressed in and the barn breathed evenly again. When he finally turned to leave, he paused at the door. The ranch was still poor. The future was still thin and uncertain. But something had been claimed here, not with papers or money, but with time and attention. Elias closed the door gently, the latch clicking into place, and walked back toward the house with the sense that whatever came next would ask more of him than he had planned to give, and that he would give it anyway. The veterinarian arrived the next morning just after 9, her truck leaving twin lines in the dirt that took longer than usual to fade. Elias watched from the barn doorway as she stepped out, already pulling on gloves, her expression professional but alert. She had been out here before, back when the ranch still had enough animals to justify regular visits. Now she took in the emptiness with a look that asked questions she didn't speak. The horse stood quietly as she examined him, though his muscles tightened beneath her touch. She moved with confidence, palpating the swollen cheek, lifting the eyelid gently, tracing the old scars with her eyes rather than her fingers. She straightened slowly, removing her gloves and folding them into her pocket. "This isn't transport damage," she said at last. Elias didn't answer. He waited. "These marks," she continued, nodding toward the neck and shoulder, "they're patterned, repeated, weeks, maybe months apart." She hesitated, then added, "I've seen this before." "Where?" Elias asked. She glanced toward the open barn door, as if the walls might be listening. "Auction horses, mail-order stock, operations that move animals fast enough no one keeps them long enough to notice." She wrote her notes carefully, the scratch of pen on paper sounding louder than it should have. When she handed Elias the sheet, her fingers lingered just long enough to convey concern without crossing into pity. "He'll recover," she said. "Physically. But you did right calling." After she left, Elias sat on the fence rail with the paper folded in his hand. The words felt heavier than their ink. "Patterned," repeated. He looked back at the horse, who stood in a patch of sun, eyes half closed, as if resting were a new skill he was learning. That afternoon, Elias pulled the contract from the drawer where he kept documents he didn't like to read. The paper was thin, the print dense. He followed the lines with his finger, reading more carefully than he had the first time. Clauses stacked atop clauses, each one shifting responsibility elsewhere. Injury during transit not guaranteed. Pre-existing conditions not acknowledged. Arbitration required. Refund contingent on return. Return the horse. Elias folded the contract and set it aside. He picked up the phone and dialed the number listed. It rang twice, then clicked to a recording. He tried again later. Disconnected. He searched online that evening, the glow of the screen lighting the kitchen in cold blue. The company's website was polished, full of smiling animals and clean barns. Testimonials scrolled by, generic and glowing. When he clicked on reviews elsewhere, pages stalled or failed to load. One forum post appeared briefly before vanishing, as if pulled away mid-sentence. He shut the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the house settle. Outside, the wind moved across the land, carrying with it the sense of distance he had lived with for years. He thought of the note, of the apology written by someone who had felt the need to say it and then disappear. The email arrived 2 days later. It was short, polite. They had been informed of his concerns. They regretted any inconvenience. They were willing to offer a full refund upon return of the horse, shipping included. The message ended with a reminder of contractual obligations. Elias read it twice. Then he walked to the barn. The horse greeted him at the gate, a small, tentative step forward that still felt like progress. Elias rested his hand on the rail and looked at him for a long moment. Sending him back would solve several problems at once. Money would return. Responsibility would lift. The ranch could go back to its careful shrinking. He thought of the swollen eye, of the scars hidden beneath the coat, of the note tied with string. No, he said aloud, the words steady. That night, another message came through, this one from an address that didn't match the company name. The tone was different, less polished. They advised him not to pursue false claims. They reminded him of legal costs, of stress, of time better spent elsewhere. It ended with a line meant to sound friendly and landed as a warning. Elias slept poorly. In the early hours, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and stared at the note again. He wondered about the hand that wrote it, whether it shook, whether the person had looked over their shoulder before tying it to the rope, whether they had hoped someone like him would be on the other end. The call came the next day from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, low and careful, asked if this was the man who had received the brown gelding from the northern supplier. Elias confirmed. There was a pause, filled with the sound of breathing. Then she spoke again. I shouldn't be calling, she said. I don't want trouble. Then hang up, Elias replied gently. She didn't. She told him she had worked at the facility briefly. That horses were moved quickly, trained hard, handled harder. That complaints were logged and ignored. That injuries were treated just enough to pass inspection. She said she had tied the note herself, heart pounding, knowing cameras were everywhere except the loading dock. I couldn't stop it, she said. I could only send him somewhere else. Elias listened without interruption. When she finished, there was nothing he could offer her except the truth. He's safe, he said. He's being cared for. She exhaled, a sound like something heavy being set down. The line went dead. Elias stood there long after the call ended, the phone warm in his hand. The story was no longer just his or the horse's. It belonged to a chain of choices made by people who believed distance would protect them. He contacted an animal welfare reporter whose work he had read once in passing. He sent photos, documents, copies of emails. He did it slowly, carefully, knowing that accuracy mattered more than outrage. Each message felt like placing a stone on a scale, trusting that weight would eventually tell the truth. The response from the company came swiftly this time. Legal language, denials, an offer to settle quietly if he ceased communication. Elias read it once, then deleted it. That evening, he stood in the barn as the sun dropped low, painting the walls in tired gold. The horse stood beside him now, without restraint, head level, breath even. Elias reached out and rested his palm against the animal's neck, feeling the steady thrum beneath skin and muscle. He had not set out to confront anything larger than his own failing ranch. He had only ordered a horse. But the quiet had been broken, and with it the comfort of looking away. Whatever followed would not be easy, and it would not be quick. Elias knew that now. As darkness settled, he closed the barn and walked back toward the house, carrying with him the understanding that truth, once noticed, has a way of demanding witness, and that some debts are paid not with money, but the reckoning did not arrive with sirens or raised voices. It came the way most truths do, through persistence, paperwork, and people who refused to look away once they had seen clearly. 2 inspectors arrived at the breeding facility on a gray morning thick with the smell of wet concrete. They walked the barn slowly, clipboards in hand, boots echoing against floors that had been scrubbed too clean. Horses stood in narrow stalls, heads low, movements restrained not by rope but by habit. The air was heavy with ammonia and silence. Records were produced, then amended. Timelines shifted. Explanations thinned under repetition. Within a week, animals were being loaded onto trailers again, but this time with state tags and supervision. Some went to sanctuaries, some to private rescues. The facility's license was suspended quietly, without ceremony. There were fines. There were sealed statements. No one went to jail. Power rarely collapses all at once. It recedes, embarrassed, hoping not to be remembered. Elias read the notice at his kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. It wasn't triumph he felt, nor relief exactly. It was something steadier, a sense that the weight he had been carrying was finally resting where it belonged. He folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the contract, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder of cost. In the barn, the horse lifted his head at the sound of Elias's boots. The swelling was gone now, the eye clear. His coat had begun to shine again, not polished, but honest, reflecting health rather than fear. He walked toward Elias without hesitation, stopping close enough that their shadows merged on the wall. They worked together in small ways. Elias repaired a broken hinge. The horse followed him down the fence line. Word traveled, as it always did in places where people had little else to trade. A neighbor dropped off extra hay. A woman from town brought old tack that still had life in it. No one made speeches. They just showed up. Months passed. The ranch did not become prosperous, but it stopped shrinking. Elias learned the horse's rhythms, the way he paused before entering open spaces, the way he relaxed when Elias spoke before touching him. Trust came slowly, then all at once, like a gate finally unlatched. One morning, just before winter loosened its grip, Elias saddled the horse for the first time. He did it carefully, explaining each movement aloud, though no one had asked him to. The horse stood still, muscles tense, then easing as minutes passed without pain. When Elias mounted, the horse took one uncertain step, then another, until they were moving together across the field, frost breaking beneath hooves. Elias laughed then, the sound surprising him with its own existence. It rose into the cold air and stayed there, uncomplicated and real. At dusk, he stood at the same fence where he had first watched the trailer arrive. The light was warmer now, stretched long across the land. The horse grazed nearby, free, lifting his head now and then to check the distance between them, not out of fear but awareness. Elias rested his arms on the rail and breathed. He had not set out to be brave. He had only chosen not to send suffering back where it came from. But some choices ripple outward, touching lives you will never meet, loosening knots you did not tie. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of earth and hay. The ranch was still quiet, but it was no longer empty. Elias reached out, and the horse came to him. He never knew how the animal found him in the long chain of hands and roads that led to his gate. But maybe kindness leaves a trail the lost can always follow. If this story touched your heart, tell us below.